My stepbrother is so broke. Oh my gosh, stepbrother. And the thing about this is, he's trying to convince the entire family that he's actually worth a lot of money, saying that he's a doctor. Then he shows up in a rented car to one of the biggest family gatherings, and I just could not hold back anymore. I let out, and I told the family everything I know. It's said that the evil men do live after them. Well, I've rebranded my own to be that the stupidity which men put up makes lives miserable for those around them long after they're gone. My father, whom I never really knew, was from a wealthy family. And, well, Iowa, that made their earnings from the cultivation of corn, soybeans, wheat, other grains. Much of the things I know about him, I learned from my mother, and I believed her. My mother was married to my father, who was the only son of his parents. My father had a knack for ladies. I came into the picture less than a year after they were married. I enjoyed the love of a father for a brief period of 2 years, as my mother soon discovered that Diane was pregnant with her husband. Diane used to be one of the workers in the family, and knowing what I know now, I believe she must have manipulated my father into sleeping with her. The moment the news broke out that she was pregnant, she began carrying herself with this attitude of a rival and entitlement. She was not even legally married to my father. I think what must have given her the boldness was the fact that my father admitted to having a relationship with her. My mom was disappointed. My father did not just cheat on her with a random lady, as that may have been tolerable, but he went as far as doing it with a worker. It was too embarrassing for my mother, and she wanted nothing to do with my dad or his family. She separated from him with the promise that he would never get to see me. My mother filed for divorce, and my grandparents tried making my father save his marriage, but my father was caught up in Diane's web to think or even act clearly. He followed through with the divorce and remarried Diane shortly after. According to Granddad's part of the story, my father felt bad for what he had done shortly after the marriage. Diane was making life difficult for him, and she even tried cutting him off from him permanently. This led my father into keeping late-night drinking and all, and he eventually lost his life one evening as a result of drunk driving. My mother was shaken to the core. Even though she had been angry at my father for messing up, she found death to be too harsh of a punishment for his misconduct. My grandparents were much more wounded by the death of my father. He was their only son, and so losing him was a terrible blow. This made grandfather decide to take care of the woman and kids which my father had left behind. Grandfather reached out to Diane and asked that she came to live in the family house, not as a worker now, but as part of the family. Diane readily accepted. It was what she had been aiming for the whole time. Grandfather reached out to my mom, but Mom initially resisted. It took a series of pleas and pacifications to get her to change her mind. She had her conditions, though. She was willing to let my granddad play an active role in my life by taking care of any financial responsibility, but she made it crystal clear she would not live in the same house as Diane. She would allow me to come visit and even spend holidays, but my stay at her place was having to be limited. My grandfather was okay with my mother's terms, so it was the only way my mother was going to let me bear my father's name. This is how my stepbrother Max and I began to grow up and strengthen of our granddad's resources. I began observing things each time my school was on holiday, and I came to visit my grandparents. I saw the way that my stepmother Diane carried herself about the whole place. You would almost think she was the legitimate wife of my father. She bossed everyone around while forgetting that she was once a worker in the same position. Even when my mother and I came to visit, she would try to indirectly send the message that she was in charge. She subtly disrespected my mom. My grandparents observed the whole thing, but my grandfather just tried turning a blind eye to it, as he didn't want to push her away since she was the mother of his grandchild. Diane even began inculcating a funny kind of mentality into Max. She told him to always be at the top wherever he was. While the advice in itself isn't bad, she meant it in a negative sense. She was saying to him to be on top even if it means throwing everybody else down. I had no issues with that, because Max never got in my way. Though I was ahead of Max by 3 years. We were at the same level academically. After I was done with high school and needed to go into college, my mother and I paid a visit to Granddad just to get him updated about my plans. We got to the house and my stepmother did not even bother hiding how disgusted our presence made her feel. We weren't surprised. It was the usual Diane we were all accustomed to. After dinner that day, my mother and I sat with Grandfather to discuss, and our conversation revolved around my going to college in a different state. Granddad was impressed with how good my grades were and reaffirmed his commitment to seeing me through. College and any other academic heights I would love to get to. We had a nice time together, and my mother and I were spending 3 more days at Grandfather's place before leaving. But to our greatest surprise, we heard my stepmother telling my granddad the very next day how Max was planning on going to college in a different state. It was not a big deal. I mean, he could go to school if he so chose, but it was just as shocking to us as the school which my aunt had in mind was the same school which I was to go to. She had heard our discussion, and the competition mindset in her began coming into play. My granddad did give preferential treatment either Max or me. He was still willing to sponsor Max. Max and I got into college with equal opportunity to make something out of ourselves in life. I think Max even had the edge over me. The money which came my way was from Grandpa's direction. While Max got money from Grandpa and his mother, the money which I received was sufficient for me. But Max was always in need of cash. This was because he was living, quote, la vida loca, and by that I simply mean he lived a crazy life. Max took after my father in that regard. He was a guest at every party which went on in school. He did not have a place of his own, even though he was given money to rent a good apartment. He survived by moving from one lady to another. I was studying business management, while Max, who was not interested in schooling, was coerced by his mother into studying to become a lab scientist. This was because her twisted mindset just felt it was a better profession compared to what I was studying. Time gradually went by, and we both graduated. On the day of our graduation, I did not bother partaking in the party held in school, as I knew what it entitled. I went straight to my mother's place, from where I would go to thank my granddad for all he's done. Max, on the other hand, stayed back, even though I had advised him to go home. He claimed that his college days were over, and he needed partying one last time. That was his mistake. Max attended his party with the goal just being to have the biggest fun of his life. But the reverse was the case. 2 hours into the celebration, the police busted the whole place. They made massive arrests while some others fled, and Max was among those who were lucky enough to escape. The party turned out to be a cover where different drugs were pushed around and the police had been tipped off. Max was lucky to have escaped. My mother and I traveled down to meet with my grandpa, and I was surprised to find Max there. He was supposed to be in another state partying about, and he told me what transpired. He had fled the state to avert any possibility of being arrested. Grandpa would later ask Max and everyone what we intended to do with our lives. I told my grandfather that I wanted to apply my knowledge as a business manager, just to aid in growing the family business. My grandfather was pleased with the response. He turned to Max in anticipation of an answer, and Max's response just, took me by surprise. Max said it's always been his desire right before his college days to help save life. He informed Grandpa that he planned on using the next 6 months to raise some capital so he could relocate to the state where he had schooled and settle down there as a medical practitioner. Grandpa promised to give Max a certain amount of money that would aid him in settling down in the city. I started working at the farm with immediate effect while Max just loafed about looking for a lady to, quote, devour, as before he traveled out of state in a few months. I employed every knowledge I've gotten from school, but it doesn't seem to make any difference in my family's farming business, which was already thriving. This was not because they were not efficient methods, it's simply because my stepmother was choking the life out of me. Grandfather has given her a degree of authority over the workers, and I was supposed to manage things together with her. But she wanted to bring me under her. She rarely welcomed any suggestions which I made towards improving things on the farm. I soon argued with stepmother because of the workers. Right from my childhood days, I've been aware of the way she treated these workers, though I could not say or do anything then. I was now in charge of oversight, and it was my duty to try to put things into place. I tried to talk to Diane about it, but she flared up. She claimed that I had no right to suggest how to deal with the workers. So, I respectfully tried to make her see that you can only get the best out of the workers when they're treated nicely. Diane refused. She rebuked me and warned me that I never challenged her decisions again. Diane was lucky my mother was not around when the whole saga was going on, otherwise hell would have broken loose. I could not let the whole issue slide, though. I decided to talk to Max about it before going to Grandpa. Max tried talking to his mother, but she turned the whole thing around. She began telling him that he was blind to not see I was trying to flaunt myself as the heir to Grandpa's fortune, and that's what she was trying to avoid. She further claimed that I was trying to paint her in a bad light amongst everyone, when it was clear to me that Max could not talk some sense into his mother. I took the issue straight to Grandpa. Grandpa, just like everyone, knew my stepmom was a troublemaker. And so, after hearing her part of the story, which, by the way, was made up, he empathetically told her that I was not under her like the rest of the workers. He clearly stated that we were to run the affairs together and she had no right to belittle me. That's how the issue was settled. I was uncomfortable afterward, and my stepmother did not mean well to me, and there was no way I could work with her. I decided I was going to leave the family house, relocate to a different city, and start my life on my own. I informed Grandfather that I would be going to a city to start my own life. He suspected my decision must have been influenced by the tension that existed between my stepmother. I didn't deny his suspicion. I did not give in to Grandfather's persuasion to stay, and neither did I accept the money he was willing to give me, just to start life just as he had done to Max. I wanted to prove to my stepmother that I did not rely on any form of inheritance. I moved into the city 6 months ago, and I'm currently working with a startup firm. The pay, it's just, well, okay, but if I would get to the height where I want to be, I would need to make further plans for myself. I've not heard about Max so far, but I guess he's doing great because news came around that he was working at a hospital. Not my business, though. I just want to focus on myself from now on. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Today's story has a few updates to hop into. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe for daily videos and so you never miss an update. Thank you so much for that, guys, and let's go ahead and hop into update number 1. I've been living my life in peace for a while, but Max recently showed up on my doorstep and has been interrupting my peace ever since. Well, it was on a weekend while I was doing laundry that he came knocking with his bags. I was surprised to see him because we had not spoken in months. From the looks of things, it was not just a courtesy visit. He came like he was coming to spend some time. I stood looking at him with his bags beside him, and he then gave me an embrace before going on to say he just came to spend a few days with me. He claimed he was on some form of professional assignment, and though he was given a stipend to lodge in a hotel, he decided to spend the time at my place since he got a, quote, brother in the area. I was not really at a place where I could entertain visitors, but I could not just kick my stepbrother out of my house. I mean, why would I let the tension between his mom and me affect the way I relate to him? I stayed at a one-bedroom flat, so I moved out of my room for Max. I felt he would just be staying for a few days, as he earlier said, but it was all a lie. I would go out to my work each day and return to find Max at the same spot where I'd left him, on my bed. I soon got curious, but each time I asked him, he always claimed to have gone out and returned earlier than me. His lies were not adding up, and he could not sustain it for long. He finally came clean when the few days he was to spend officially became 3 weeks. Max confessed to having lost his job. He said he was fired 3 weeks into the job, and though he claimed he was not only the staff who was laid off, I knew he was thrown away for his incompetence. If he was fired 3 weeks ago, then why was he not in his own house? Grandpa had given him enough money to sustain him, so he was supposed to have an apartment of his own. The fact that he wanted to stay temporarily at my place meant he had squandered the money which was given to him. I didn't want to throw Max out of my home, but I knew at the same time that I could not keep feeding a grown man. We were given the same privilege and opportunity, and he chose to blow his. I can confidently say that anything in my possession, including the house in which he wants to temporarily stay, was paid for by my sweat. I told Max that I would accommodate him till he was able to get a job in a place of his own. He was okay with it. I mean, it's not like he had a choice. Max began looking for a job at any medical facility, but for some reason, he couldn't get one. I knew that if I sat down and waited for him to get a job all by himself, then I was probably in for a very long ride. I discussed this with a friend of mine, and we were able to secure a job interview for Max at a hospital. I received a call from my friend today while at work. He was calling to inform me that Max had failed the interview. It confirmed my assertion that his previous employers had made the right call to dismiss him. He was a decorated lab scientist who knew nothing about his profession. After my friend informed me that my stepbrother had failed the interview as a result of his lack of knowledge, he noted that there was a job opening in the same hospital for a cleaner. He asked that I tell Max about it, as the opening would not be there forever. I would talk to Max about it once I get home today, but he has no option to take it. This may not be his dream job, but it's better than him just sitting at home. Update number 2. My stepbrother is just one funny fellow. I finally informed him about the outcome of his interview, and he was a bit dejected, and I gave him the news of the vacancy for a cleaner. He shouted, "That is really below me. What would my mother say when she finds out that I'm just an ordinary cleaner?" My grandpa would see me as an utter failure once he learns that his grandson, who was supposed to be doing great, is just a mere cleaner at a hospital. I'd rather sit at home till a better offer came my way. I felt like slapping some sense into him so he could come back into touch with reality. He was missing the fact that I was not his mother, and neither was I his caregiver. He was mistaking my liberty to mean I was responsible for him. If I let him, he would just waste away in my house. He doesn't even have what it takes to secure and sustain a better job offer, even if it came. I told him without menacing words that he would be leaving my house if he was still jobless in 5 days. It was at that point he reluctantly accepted to try it out. My stepbrother Max pleaded with me to keep the whole thing a secret. He did not want anyone to find out the truth about where he stayed and the kind of job he did. My mother visited yesterday, and Max was the one who opened the door for her. She was surprised, as she did not expect to see him in my home. My mother, though she did not transfer aggression towards Max, always warned me to be careful around him. The look on her face clearly showed she was not happy finding Max in my house. After pleasantries were shared, she began asking Max what he was up to and he was doing in my house. Max put up a grand show. He claimed he worked with a medical firm, and he only came to spend the weekend with me since it's been a while since we've spoken. Max spoke a half-baked truth. Well, he did indeed work with a medical facility, but with the way he vaunted himself, my mother felt he was probably a doctor or something. She never knew Max was just an office cleaner. I did not blow Max's cover, though. I played along. My mother finally stated the reason for her visit. She had given love a second chance, and she was dating a man who recently proposed to her. She told me she said yes to him, and they would be getting married soon. She wanted me to accompany her to see my grandfather, so she could inform him she was getting remarried. I'm happy for my mom. She had remained single ever since my father embarrassed and put her in a mess by getting his worker pregnant and divorcing her. My mom, who wanted to focus on my training alone, decided to stay away from relationships. My mother's sacrifice means a lot to me, and I would be going with her to see my granddad soon. I just hope my granddad would be understanding enough to see that my mother's remarriage did not mean she was dishonoring the family or cutting herself off from them. Besides, if the tables were turned and it was my mother who was dead, my late father would have long remarried. Update number 3. I've met with my soon-to-be father, and I find it to be quite interesting. I don't think he would be anything like my dad. He approaches life from a reasonable point of view. We visit the family house, and the reception from everybody except my stepmother, Diane, was great. My grandfather was happy to see I was doing well, and grandfather did not wait for mother to break the news of her intended marriage to the house. He knew from the moment we walked in with my mother's fiancé that there was something between them. While we were having lunch, he made a direct comment to my mother's fiancé, where he pleaded with him to treat my mother better than his son had treated her. The statement took everybody by surprise. Well, my granddad is no child. It was probably his experience speaking. My mother took my granddad's statement as a clue to talk more about the relationship between her and her fiancé. My mother spoke about her decision to give love a second chance, but made it known that she was still part of the family. Diane made a smirk statement while my mother spoke. It was embarrassing, but my mom just ignored it. She didn't want to create a scene in the presence of her fiancé, and grandfather asked to have a private discussion with my mother's fiancé, and that's when my mother decided to confront Diane. My mother approaching Diane about the attitude she had earlier put up was not a smart move, because the issue immediately escalated. The tension has always been there between both of them, and so approaching Diane was the spark needed to blow the whole thing up. The purposefully raised her voice, and it led to my granddad rushing out of his study with my mother's fiancé. The moment they came, Diane began talking about how my mother had always been looking for who to exploit. She went on talking nonsense about how my mother was simply wanting to get married to her fiancé because he was rich. A rich widower who had no children of his own. Well, okay then. She claimed my mother was only replicating the same thing she had done when she got married to my father. The accusations were just outrageous. First of all, it was nobody's darn business, especially my stepmother, if my mother chose to remarry and her choice of a partner. Was she supposed to get married to someone who was in rags? Even if that was the case, my stepmother Diane would still find something derogatory to say about it. A fight almost broke out as my mother nearly lost it. The only thing that held her back was the fact that everyone, including her fiancé, had gathered, and I mean, who would want to fight her late husband's second wife in the presence of her fiancé? My mother walked out of the scene, and her fiancé went after her. He made her understand that all Diane had said meant was nothing to him, and my mother had told him about everything right from the start of the relationship, and the attitude which Diane had put up while they were all having lunch proved to him that she was a troublemaker. My grandfather was cross with Diane. He compelled her to offer an apology to both my mother and her fiancé amid everyone. Diane had no other alternative than to offer an apology. That was in no way heartfelt. Heartfelt or not, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the satisfaction of seeing Diane humbled before everyone. Update number 4. The bad-mouthing of my mother by my stepmother did not in any way ruin my mother's relationship with her fiancé. The marriage preparations underway, but that's not the reason for this update. After I returned home, I told Max how the whole thing had gone, and how his mother almost messed things up. I was not expecting him to pick up the phone, dial his mother's number, and shout at her. I just thought it's necessary to let him know his mother crossed the line, and I would not sit back and do nothing if a repetition occurred. He offered what he called an apology on behalf of his mother, but noted that what grandfather had done was a bit too harsh. He claimed that grandfather could have asked for a private apology between our mothers and my mother's fiancé. I did not pick offense at what Max had said because I have concluded him to be as dumb and stupid as his mother. How could he claim grandfather had gone extreme when his mother's foolishness and jealousy almost ruined things for my mom? If she could embarrass her publicly, then it was just perfect that the apology be made public too. I did not push the issue any further. It was not long before my stepmother started another drama, one which I'm now forced to act. Earlier this evening, we were all gathered at the family house. It's always been the custom of the family to spend Christmas together, and we usually threw a giant party at the evening. Everybody was there. My grandparents, my mother, her fiancé, my stepmother, and even our friends were present at the Christmas Eve dinner. The friends who came would sleep over, as the Christmas party would hold the next day. Max made a grand entrance into the place. Even I, who was housing him, was shocked by the whole ordeal. I'm still managing myself with the little which I earn, and so I hired a cab to bring me down there. Max, who was squatting with me, came with a Lexus 350 SUV. He soon became the center of attraction at the house, and as you would rightfully guess, his mother was basking in his glory. I knew it was all a facade, because this was someone I lived with. No sooner had they arrived did he begin announcing to the folks that there he was, the assistant of a neurologist. It was big terminology for the old folks to understand, and they just assumed him to be a doctor. It was all part of his plan. Presenting himself to be a doctor, the whole thing made it look like I was a failure in life. Even Grandpa fell for the theatrics. And to add insults to the injury, Diane dedicated a toast to Grandpa. She noted it was for his contributions to me. She didn't just stop there, though. In her usual ways, she would always find a way to pick on my mother. She went on to wish my mother the best and say that she hopes I become successful as her son in the future, so that my mom could at least know the joy of having a successful son. Though her statement seemed innocent, it was a very insensitive thing to say. I watched Max swell with pride as praises were heaped on him while my mother felt embarrassed. It was the height of it. I decided I've taken enough. I acted like I was not hurt by the words which my stepmother had said, but I would be sitting with my grandfather shortly before he retires to bed to expose every little detail of Max's scheme. Update number 5. Final post by OP. Well, guys, this post would probably be the final and shortest, but trust me, it'll be worth it. So here we go. My stepmother has just gotten served a hot bowl of embarrassment. I met grandfather and told him everything he had seen and heard from Max and my stepmother earlier that evening was false. Grandfather initially felt that I was just being jealous of Max's achievement. I went ahead to tell him that Max had been squatting at my place for some months, and he was not a doctor, nor a doctor's assistant to one in the sense that he had presented himself. I took out my phone and showed grandfather proof of what I was saying. I showed him text messages which Max had sent to me. He informed me that he would not be coming home as he was spending the night at a lady's place. Grandfather took me seriously the moment he saw certain proof which I presented to him. He was about to blow hot when I suggested he kept calm and just devise a means to get back at Max for his deceit. I proposed that grandfather acted as if he had suddenly come down with some type of illness, to watch out to see if Max's reaction would be that of a medical practitioner, Granddad agreed to go with my plan, and one I can say for sure is that he deserves an Oscar award for the show he put up the next day. He beat Max at his own game. We were all gathered together the next day when Grandfather decided to make a toast. He was midway into his toast when he collapsed to the ground. There was commotion everywhere. People looked for the only doctor in the room who could save a grandfather's life, being that of Max. Max was called upon, but rather than spring into action, he began fidgeting. He knew nothing about administrating first aid while waiting for responsive help. Everybody looked in confusion as the one who prided himself as a doctor could do nothing. Someone suddenly suggested that Max carried out CPR, but everybody was shocked when Max said that he could not. Grandfather suddenly opened his eyes and responded that he could not, because he was not a trained doctor but a fraudulent parading himself as one. Grandfather showed everyone the evidence of what he was talking about. You should have seen the reaction on the face of Diane. The embarrassment was massive, and her source of pride and glory was a scam. She didn't wait to hear the comments of folks. She ran out of the party that night in shame, and I could see my mother smile with satisfaction as both Diane and Max were humiliated. It's been a long time since dawn, but Diane's still locked up in her room as a result of the embarrassment. Max left the house for the city that night, and I would have to kick him out of my house when I got back to the city, as there's no tension between us. Since, he's angry. I exposed him. Well, at least at the end of the story, Grandpa decided to deal with this in a fantastic manner. I'm talking about taking things into his own hands. Go ahead and playing a trick on the stepbrother is a very good idea to go ahead and just, freak him out. To maybe the point where he never wants to lie again. Just imagine seeing your grandfather on the ground, laying there in distress, and you can't help him, but everybody wants you to help him because you're the only doctor they know. But it turns out Grandpa's playing a big old joke on ya. Okay guys, karma came in this story. Let me know what you thought about it. Maybe you would have done something differently if you were in OP's position. Maybe you would not even have exposed the brother at all and just continue to let him go about his lies. Either way, drop your comments down below. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories, animate them every single day. So if you want some time to pass by, you're bored at work, maybe you're jogging on the treadmill, stop on by the channel, see what stories we're reading today. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see ya!